know that energy access is essential for bringing people out of poverty. And while strides have been made in recent years, it is estimated that around 1.03 billion people around the world, a figure we heard earlier today, still do not have access to electricity. There is no one-size-fits-all solution to providing energy, and each of the available solutions operates at different scales and serves different specific needs. In this panel on energy access, my guests and I are going to take a look at energy access. Joining me now here live in the studio, Dr. Habtame Itefa, the Minister of Water and Energy from Ethiopia. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Ajay Mathur, Director General of the International Solar Alliance from India. Antonio Almonte Reynoso, the Minister of Energy and Mines from the Dominican Republic. Welcome, thank you. And Neri Pradhan, the COO of New Energy Nexus. Thank you for joining us. And we have two guests who are also joining us virtually. Wanjira Maathai, the Vice President and Regional Director for Africa for the World Resources Institute. Also joining us virtually is Dr. Jorge Rivera Staff, the National Secretary of Energy for Panama. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me here in Berlin or from your home. I want to go ahead and get right into our first round of questions. I have one that I'll address to each of you, and I'll ask you to limit your responses to around 90 seconds, if you can. I know it's very easy to do. What concrete actions need to be taken to achieve access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all? I'd like to start out with our two virtual guests, beginning with our first guest in the studio, Minister Habtame Itefa.
Thank you very much. The very critical part from where to start. Concrete action on energy accessibility is to know what resources do we have. Today, we can see globally the main source of energy is the fossil source that we need to have paradigm shift. So that may not be sustainable in the long term. In globe, every nation, every country has its own specific potential source of energy, and that has to be clearly identified. Hydropower, solar, wind, and so on are the preferable ones. That is what I would suggest as a possibility of addressing in terms of accessibility, affordability, and then sustainability issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now go to our first digital guest, Minister Jorge Rivera Staff, for your idea on concrete actions that need to be taken to achieve access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here again this year in the BETD. For Panama, it's a great opportunity to show what are we doing and share some ideas. For us, there is a direct link between energy transition and the universal access. When you talk about affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy, you're talking about SDG 7. We're talking about the objective of the world to develop. And as part of our national energy transition agenda, the first strategy for that agenda of work aligned to the year 2030 is the universal access strategy. And what concrete actions we are implementing in that, we're stepping in as a priority. One, to identify specifically the areas and population that needs to be close the gap. Second, to state specifically with the biggest amount of data to do that on the resources that we need to, we estimate in Panama around $500 million. And to state the positive externalities that the fulfillment of the SDG 7 brings to hold the development of the country, but also in the economic recovery that we need right now.
Thank you very much, Minister. I'd like to go next to a guest here in the studio, Minister Reynoso. Concrete steps, concrete actions. Oh, I'd like to remind you to use your microphone so everyone can hear you. I think it's already on.
It's okay?
Fantastic.
Yes, thank you very much. In the Dominican Republic, we had a special unit for improve the rural electrification. Some suburban communities all around the countries. We had more than 10 million, around 10 million and a half population in the Dominican Republic. And around 98% of the population had access to the energy, especially to electricity. The main action are the following action. First, to create, and we create already, a special unit in the Ministry of Energy and Mine, the Dominican Republic, which build a facility to access of the people in rural remote area to the electricity, which introduce microgrid projects with solar panel in rural communities. We had a target, very important target is rural schools. And we introduced micro hydropower and also wind energy systems. But the main instruments are solar panel and the micro hydro facilities.
Thank you, Minister. I'd like to ask you next, Aneri Pradhan, concrete actions we need to take.
Sure. Thank you for having me here. So first, we all know that solar and wind is the cheapest form of electricity, so especially solar. So the fossil fuel industry, however, is still being bankrolled by investors. Governments are still supporting this industry, even though it's now truly archaic. So the concrete steps really needed is supporting entrepreneurs and startups to really truly scale technologies that can proliferate through adoption. So, and that requires government working with startups, the private sector, and civil society altogether. Governments can remove the barriers that allows these technologies to proliferate. Civil society groups need to be continued to be funded and supported to advocate for cleaner energy transitions in wherever communities they are in. And New Energy Nexus, the organization I represent, truly believes that that is the way for 100% clean energy for 100% of the population.
Thank you very much. I see you nodding your head, Ajay Mathur, and I'd like to ask you next. Concrete actions.
The long and the short of it is, yes, resources matter. And if you have access to solar energy or wind, as Aneri said, that is the source of choice. And why is it the source of choice? Because today, solar and wind are the cheapest forms of electricity when the sun is shining and when the wind is blowing. What happens when it isn't? And that's where mini-grids come in. If you ask me, the best option today is mini-grids for rural electrification. What do governments need to do? Make the regulatory provisions. What is the size to which they can do without any approvals? What is it that would happen when the grid reaches there? What is the tariffs? Hopefully, they can set their tariffs according to what their consumers are willing and able to pay. If you do these, you see solar mini-grids coming up like mushrooms. We have an example of a company which is now set up, with these regulatory mechanisms in place. They've already set up 300. They plan to go to 1,000 by the end of next year. And they've attracted 40% of their funding from a Japanese financial company. So it's economically viable as well. And it meets everybody's needs, has no solar emissions, has no carbon emissions. It's a win-win-win situation.
It does sound like a win-win-win situation. I want to go now to Wandira Maathai, our last digital participant today. Tell me, what do you think? Concrete actions.
Well, I couldn't agree more with my fellow panelists. The truth is that Africa has 75% of the energy access gap. And unless we are not listening, this is significant and it's a massive stumbling block. So finance, as has been mentioned, is crucial. I mean, it is the beginning of where we have to start. Sub-Saharan African countries require an annual investment of 28 billion by 2030. And this is according to the IEA. Now, this is about mini-grids. Now it's about grids, and it's also about off-grid investments. So finance is crucial to be able to put in place. But I want to add another point that adds to the many wonderful points that have been made. And that is about modernizing power infrastructure to support the reliability, flexibility, and sustainability of energy. So a reliable and strong power system with flexibility to integrate the variable renewable energy sources is key to attracting the sort of investments that are needed for a clean energy transition. And that means modernizing the grid to improve its efficiency and flexibility. As such, the role of power utilities in this transformation is crucial. And so this is another point that would go a long way into building the sort of efficiency and flexibility that is needed.
Efficiency and flexibility, two words that we've heard before in this panel, and I'm sure we're going to hear more of them during the whole BETD. Thank you for those opening statements, panelists. I'd like to get now into a first round of questions. The assessment of energy access and national policy solutions. I'd like to ask you to keep your responses to these individualized questions to between 3 and 4 minutes because we have a lot to get through today. Aneri Pradhan, I'd like to start with you. How would you judge the overall state of energy access worldwide? And what role do you see for the private sector to advance SDG 7?
So first, I started working in the energy access sector about 15 years ago, and the statistic at that time was 1.2 billion people lack access to electricity. 15 years later, you're saying 1 billion. I heard another statistic at 749 million. Regardless, we still have a lot of work to do, given that 15 years has passed, and it's good that many millions have gotten access to electricity, but it's nowhere near where it should be, especially for to reach the 2030 goal of universal modern energy access. So I want to highlight some of the solutions that the private sector brings that we really need to support and scale up. So in New Energy Nexus's Indonesia program, we support a startup called Sumba Island Sustainable Solutions, where they providing thousands of solar home systems in a community that lacks access to electricity. And this is very much a community-driven effort. Another startup in our portfolio, Power Solutions on our China program, creates and manufactures off-grid solar products for rural populations. So the technologies are out there. This is not a technical problem. It's a market problem, it's an access problem, it's a finance problem, it's a policy issue. It's all about scaling these types of solutions so that we can really truly reach these modern targets. One area of the energy access sector where I would say is particularly behind is the clean cooking sector. There's about 3 billion people still who lack modern access to fuels and cooking. And from a climate perspective, it's disastrous. From a human health perspective, it's 4 million people are dying every year. The private sector has not been adequately supported in this. There hasn't been enough financing, and there hasn't been enough government action to truly allow some of these appropriate technologies to proliferate. So that's where the private sector is really needed, because the few million that have received electricity in the past 15 years has primarily received those services through the private sector.
Thank you very much, Aneri Pradhan. Clean cooking is a huge issue, especially when it comes to ideas of gender equality as we move forward. I want to turn now to Minister Jorge Rivera's staff. You know, energy access in Panama developed from around 70% in 1990 to almost near universal energy access in Panama. I wanted to ask you what policies and measures contributed to this development, and what is the role of renewable energy in that regard?
Thank you. Actually, right now we have around 5% of this universal access gap, mostly in our indigenous and mountain areas. And that's a key issue to develop the last mile because of the cost of that. But as the previous panelist has said, we right now have the technology, the downgrading of the costs of the technologies, mostly from solar panels, give us the great opportunity to fulfill this gap. How? We have, right now, as I mentioned in the past intervention, we have an national energy transition agenda, and the first strategy for this agenda to develop is the universal access, that it involves also not only electrification, but also rural access, and the role of the women there is central. The commitment from us to empower the community, mostly the women. We have a pilot project to empower women as managers of these systems. We have developed this strategy, and it comprehends around 6 main axes. The one is strategic planning, the legal and regulatory framework reforms that we need to improve. We have the finance innovation that we need to fulfill and to guarantee the resources to close the gap, the research and development and innovation process, and the community empowerment. It's not only about technology, it's about our business models, but also it's about the involvement of the community. So that are the big issues that we are presenting as part of the renewable, because half of this gap that we have right now will be closed with panel solars, with microgrids, with mini grids and individual systems, but also the extension of the grid that we're going to close the gap from half of this of the gap, as I mentioned, will come from renewables. Our grid is around 80% renewable in Panama, 70% of hydro, and the rest of the 10% of the renewable energy comes from wind and from solar, and we're continue to grow that. So we are committed to that the renewable energy is going to be on the center of the closing the gap of the energy access. For us, as we mentioned, the energy transition agenda is a political commitment with policy regulatory framework adjustments. And for these people, the energy transition is coming from the 19th century, finally to the 21st century. So this is one of the key adjustments that we are doing in our whole political agenda. We're working the process of the presence of the governmental services that we provide to our people, water, education, sanitation, etc. And the energy, closing the energy gap is part of this endeavor.
Thank you very much, Minister Staff. That energy gap is something I want to discuss now with one of our panelists here in the studio, Minister Itefa. I want to talk to you about Ethiopia. It has a rich endowment of renewable energy sources, and I think you've managed to achieve almost universal access to electricity in urban areas. But I want to talk about energy access in rural areas, which is still limited, but it's expanding at a rapid pace. What kind of policies led to this rather optimistic look? And do you have more planned?
Yeah, thank you. This is really a very appropriate question. Just to give overall idea, in Ethiopia we have a population of more than 112 million, where about 63% of the population is under energy deficit. Most of them are in the rural area. So as a nation, at the country level, we are working toward this by 2030 in such a way we can create 100% accessibility using with our resource. At the beginning, that's why I was saying is, what do we have? As a country, our main energy source is the hydropower, where Ethiopia is really naturally gifted with that in terms of topography, in terms of availability. That is where we are maximizing our effort. And the second one is the solar energy, where one of our panelists was really saying, at household level, the off-grid system that we are contributing to our people in changing the life of our people toward prosperity is using the solar system and the wind. These are our 3 critical issues of investment area. So far, we have national electrification program that is mandated at our ministry level to devise our policy and gear toward about the accessibility of the energy. The critical point that I would like to raise here is, as experience, we do have clean cooking source so that our poor mothers in the village will not spend more of their time in going to forest to collect the woods that will really remain green, rather than better to provide them energy-saving technologies at household level. That is also one of our good experience we are doing. So 2 critical issues we can see from Ethiopia. One thing, in the long term, we are developing our hydropower in such a way that the energy demand at national level is okay, then even we can collaborate with our neighboring, Djibouti, Sudan, Kenya, we are working very good. In short term, at household level also, we are helping our family in such a way that they are accessible to energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cooperation with neighbors is an important theme for all of the sessions here at the BETD. I'd like to turn now to Wanjira Maathai. with a question: how can we reach scale in the energy access sector in a sustainable and replicable way when decentralized energy solutions are by nature geography and context dependent?
Well, they are, but as you've heard from the minister from Ethiopia, it is entirely possible to make the necessary investments to make universal access available. I think we are all endowed with all manner of natural resources. And as a matter of fact, for most of Africa, renewables are where we are. Africa is only responsible for such a small, minuscule 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Many are already, Kenya, for example, at 80% renewable. But what we have to do is de-risk investments in our part of the world, especially in the clean energy sector, because the role of private investors in financing renewable energy is crucial. But there are very high costs, and sometimes uncertain energy policies and regulations make it extremely risky in perception for investors who are looking to come in. So that's one clear one. And then, of course, financing projects to stimulate demand. This is a very interesting one because there's very little focus generally on generating demand, making electricity, as we heard from the minister, in Ethiopia, in rural areas, largely unaffordable when we do not have the sort of farms of solar powered irrigation, for example, available for people to enhance food security and reduce vulnerability to climate change, ensuring that the sort of energy grids are affordable, reliable across the different value chains that rely on them. So providing the sort of affordable finance that will be coupled with technical assistance will also be crucial in creating the sort of energy demand that's needed, because the uptake of energy is as important as the supply side of this. I mentioned already the idea of modernizing our infrastructure, but there's also shifting investments away from fossil fuels and trying to begin to invest in some of the hydro and other alternatives instead of fossil fuels, as we have seen in the past. So there's a lot of opportunities. I don't think it's limited. For Africa, we definitely have multiple opportunities. And we also, I just want to mention that how important it is for the region of Africa to focus on energy access. As I mentioned, the gap is largest here, but also on eliminating poverty as part of the agenda for energy access. That has to be a priority for us.
Absolutely has to be a priority. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I'd like to turn now to Ajay Mathur here in the studio with me. Now, the mission, as I understand it, of the International Solar Alliance is every home, no matter how far away, will have a light at home. It's beautiful. I want to know, how do you plan on achieving this goal?
At the end of the day, the major challenge to providing these resources is the lack of resources, particularly financial resources, to be able to put up the supply systems, generation, supplies, transmission, etc. Why? When we talk to international financing agencies, they tell us that the economic risks, perceived risks to financing are too high. To us, this implies the need for risk management facilities, whether it is guarantees, whether it is the working capital, etc., that can be provided so that if there is a delay in payments that can be... in each country, there would be a risk mitigation that is needed. That we believe is essential to draw it in. Now, by itself, it's not adequate. You also need capacity building. Wanjira talked about the need for local development of people. I think Aneri also talked about the fact that you need to have startups. You need to have people who are competent in what they do. Certification of trainers and of the trainees. And then the ability to have business models which make sense in the local context. So this is a big menu of things, but starting with what we talked about earlier, the regulations, following up with risk mitigation facilities, following up with capacity building, are a mixture through which we can ensure that every home has a light.
This is fantastic. I also love that you bring up certification of trainers. It's going to be a session that will have, will be the subject of a panel session that we have tomorrow. A really critical and important thing, as you say as well, Aneri. I'd like to turn now to you, Minister Reynosa. Access to electricity developed from around 75% on average, I think 55% in rural areas in 1990 in the Dominican Republic to almost 100% today. Now, what were some of the contributing factors that led to this? How did you achieve this critically and especially in rural areas?
Well, maybe we should say that one of the points, or one of the themes in which the political class in the Dominican Republic agree altogether is to get the universal access of the population to the electricity service. All parties in the Dominican Republic have this conception. By that reason, during 1990, when the electricity sector was partially privatized, the government kept the transmission electricity company and also the hydroelectric electricity company. With the transmission systems, the government had maintained the expansion, growing the network all around the Dominican geography, covering more, including remote rural area. And that's a key point, because that's allowed this community to connect easily to the electricity service. The second thing is that the government have one subsidized policies, and the rural area or communities which have been introduced some electricity service with solar, hydroelectric, etc. They don't pay anything for the electricity services. The other thing that the Dominican government do is that they work to get contribution from private sector, and especially for not government organization, national and international. It's the case of the cooperation from Germany. They have been very active helping communities to get electricity assets. And the government has this possibility mainly with the contribution with some mining company, private one, and some other electricity company too. There are another thing for me very, very important is that from the end of the 90s, the Dominican government specializes, I say that, one a special unit dedicated to promote the rural electrification around all the Dominican geography. And that's very important because we are talking about the one professional body which has different kinds of specialties, engineering, sociology, etc. A special body which is working to get the universal access to the electricity services of all Dominicans. And I think these are the key point or the key reason why the access to the electricity in the Dominican Republic has been growing fast during the last years.
Thank you very much. Sounds like some really fascinating projects, important projects that you have in the Dominican Republic. That's it for our first round of questions. I'd like to start with our second round of questions. We have used about half of our time so far. And I'd like to start with you, Minister Itefa. How do you manage to coordinate off-grid measures at the national level? Now, I know you spoke a little bit about some of the cooperation that you do with your neighboring countries, but I'm interested in knowing on the national level.
Thank you very much. At the national level, actually, in Ethiopia, we do have federal system. So there are regional governments who are operating as grassroots level to the district level. So actually, they are more responsible for at household level, especially in the village, in the rural area, how they can really create accessibility to energy. Biogas is one area where we work upon. The other one is the solar, and such kind of possible way have been doing. From national level, we do have a structure that is leading the entire system, from the federal to the regional level. For example, in the Ministry of Water and Energy, that is led by the State Minister, that is clearly by one sector, where we do have the Ethiopia Electrification Program is responsible for development of the entire system, and Ethiopia Electric Utility is the one managing the system or the utility service. So such kind of linkage is how really we are working at national level. And these two critical points are there. The tariff we have in Ethiopia is really, that is compensated and supported by the government in such a way that it is affordable. One of the critical issues raised at the beginning was affordability. Can really Ethiopians afford the cost of generating the power? No, they cannot do that. So at national level, really, the government is supplying and assisting the community or the people to use that possible way. That is one of our alternatives. The second one, really, we are working upon is encouraging private sectors in such a way they can get involved in PP model, private-public partnership aspect. In such a way we can attract investors who can work upon energy development, and then they can get payback accordingly also. So we have a good policy issue. The PPP can join Ethiopia for development of any potential source, either from hydropower, from solar, from wind. All are renewable and really very wonderful from availability in Ethiopia. And that will create really a good linkage. Just the last point I want to mention is at national level when we are dealing with the cooperation with our neighboring countries. Our aim is to come to prosperity together in a way of both livelihood of our neighboring are benefited from the energy source we are developing. That is also how we are trying to link in the national level and the neighboring level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cooperation is quite important. I'd like to come back to you, Minister of Reynosa. Now, the Dominican Republic relies highly on imported fossil fuels for its power generation. In 2017, you passed legislation to increase the share of renewables to 25% by 2025. Are you on track to meet that goal, and how would you judge the outlook for renewable energy in your country? Okay, please use your microphone. No worries.
Yes, the law was in 2007. By that time, if you remember, the costs of the renewable energy system were very, very expensive. And then the Dominican government introduced some incentives, a special condition to attract investment in solar and wind energy mainly. The situation internationally had changed in the Dominican Republic too. And then now the introduction of renewable energy are growing fast. Especially in solar energy and in wind too. We are far from 25 or 30% of the energy service relying on renewable energy, but the investment are growing. We had water and wind and solar, we had about 20% of the electricity service covered by renewable energy. But the government now are trying to promote more investment in renewable because we are one country, we had to import all the fuels to produce electricity. We don't have any fuels resource, something like oil and gas and coal. We had to buy in the international market all our fuels. And that is very dangerous, and that is a very difficult situation for our country because especially in the actual situation in the international market for the fossil fuels, country like Dominican Republic, that it depend almost more than 80% of these fuels in the international market. Now they understand that had to grow in the introduction of renewable energy because our country has very good level of sun. Most of the years, modest but important level of wind too, and that means that we can increase the participation of this renewable primary energy in the production of electricity. But still, is very difficult situation in this moment in the Dominican Republic.
I think you're absolutely right. This moment is a difficult situation, I think, for all of us on the globe, and it has been a wake-up call for so many of us that energy access, that energy security is also it's one of the most fundamental issues that faces us today, alongside climate change.
I agree with you, but we had some countries, like in my case, small one, Iceland, and without natural resource in fuel, the vulnerable situation is very high if you compare most of the countries in the world.
Absolutely correct. I'd like to go now to Wandira Maathai, who joins us virtually. Now, energy access is highly interlinked to other priorities. We talked about a couple, water, health, and gender. What potential is there for synergies between these important topics, and which measures would you see fit?
Well, I think all of those issues have really been mentioned. I think that we could not possibly imagine for the African continent that renders them resilient to the biggest existential issue, climate change, without universal access to energy. That has got to be the focus of all our governments. All our priorities must be on ensuring that we can have a just energy transition, because it is a priority for the continent to eliminate what is the most debilitating situation that renders them most vulnerable, as we saw with the IPCC latest Working Group 2 report, that poverty is a crucial stumbling block for us. So energy access across the board. And as we have heard, it is extremely important for us to work on issues of cost, issues of reliability, issues of effectiveness, and of course, issues of finance. The truth of the matter is, for generations, we've been talking about these issues, but I don't know why we don't crack through. So perhaps the biggest opportunity now is for solidarity. Solidarity with the most vulnerable. The minister from the Dominican Republic has explained just how vulnerable the situation is. What more is for the global natural system to move and invest in ways that secures everybody?
Wandira Maathai with an important question that I think we need to be answering here at the BETD and once everyone goes home and gets to work. Thank you for asking that question, Wandira Maathai. Ajay Mathur, I'd like to turn to you now. The private sector plays a vital role in the provision of clean energy, especially in rural areas. And how does the ISA support these initiatives and companies in the fields?
You're absolutely right. At the end of the day, scaling and replication occurs because you have business models which make sense to the private sector. What can we do? As I said earlier, the single reason which draws the private sector is local reforms. So policy reforms which give a place to the private sector to provide these services and charge prices that the communities are able and willing to pay is the first key intervention. The second intervention is, how do you interest these private sector players? Because at the end of the day, you need local developers to be part of it. These are the people who know the communities, who know the financial markets, and who can make a living out of providing these services and collecting monies. They know, do I need to put in AI? Should I hire one more person? If I need to replicate to 1,000, is it necessary for me to have a maintenance man on every one project or every 5 projects? Those are key issues which local people can answer. So you need local people. I think there was this discussion of how do you enable the private sector to invest. A key issue there lies in what are the kinds of interventions that the system allows. For example, how deep is the market? Is it possible to convert to securitize future earnings? If it is, it becomes much easier to raise resources. If it isn't, then you need to create the kinds of funds that are needed from where they can borrow. The long and the short of it is that there's no one size fits all. But at the end of the day, you do need a clear policy guidelines, you do need resources, and you do need people.
You need people, you need resources, and one size absolutely does not fit all. And that's why I want to turn now to Aneri Pradhan, because decentralized energy solutions are going to play a crucial role in providing clean energy to off-grid areas where a one-size-fit-all solution isn't going to work. How does your initiative support the provision of such solutions?
Sure. So New Energy Nexus is the world's largest climate and clean energy accelerator. We've funded and supported over 400 startups to date, and operate in 10 countries, many of which are emerging markets: India, Uganda, Nigeria, Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, and more. And energy access being large issues in these regions are a key focus for a lot of the startups that we support and accelerate. The Nexus Uganda program in particular, it's actually one that I founded, won the Ashton Award in COP26 for energy access innovation. Because in Uganda, there are 10,000 community-based organizations that mostly are in the rural areas and started by community leaders. And New Energy Nexus Uganda provides loans, skills training, and support for these community-based organizations to become energy access delivery companies. And that effort has been very successful to date. They've invested in 154 community-based organizations, which has provided access to 100,000 people in rural Uganda. And one community-based organization in particular, RF Care, the way this works is they work in Rwenzori Highlands and received a small loan. It's only 2,000 USD from New Energy Nexus Uganda, used that capital to invest in cook stoves, clean cook stoves, and was able to distribute 1,800 stoves in 1 year and giving lots of jobs in their community, especially for women, to become sales agents. So these are the types of models that New Energy Nexus really wants to support and scale up. And because we're in so many emerging markets, we see the linkages and can actually share best practices throughout these regions in supporting entrepreneurs.
Congratulations, that's really amazing. And I also think sharing best practices and communication is really what it is all about, being in dialogue with one another to say this is what we do the way forward. Thank you so much. I'd like to go now to wrap up our second round of questions to Minister Jorge Rivera staff. I'd like to ask you, what are the opportunities and challenges posed by reducing emissions from deforestation and forest deregulation to universal energy access?
Thank you, Jennifer. Actually, when we talk about emission reduction, we're talking about climate change, and we're talking about energy transition. And for us, as we have mentioned, our energy transition agenda is established by two big and main references. One is the SDGs from the United Nations, the SDG 7 to 2030, and our commitments to the Paris Agreement. In Panama, how do we link the universal access versus the forestry degradation and the conservation? Here in Panama, actually is one of the only 3 countries in the world that today can be certified as carbon negative. We absorb more carbon emissions than we produce, and we want to go further in that. And that's not only because the development of our energy electricity matrix, as I mentioned, around 80% come from renewables, but also our forest coverage. And this forest coverage is not only we are working on the conservation and how to protect that area, but also recover those areas. The recent data that we have right now in the last months indicates that we are starting to recover 1, 2, 3% of the previous degraded areas of forestry. So how do we link this to the universal access? Around 4% of our energy matrix, not electricity, energy matrix in the country comes from the burning of wood to cook in these regions, as I mentioned, the mountain and indigenous areas. So if we close the gap with the plan and the strategy that we have, we will also contribute to reduce the emissions from this around 4% of the wood burning. And the other specific goals that we have regarding the emissions in order to go ahead with our carbon negative status is to reduce the emissions in the transportation. So for that part of the energy transition agenda, it's a national strategy for electric mobility. So this is important, as you have mentioned in the panel and the conversations, the synergies and the importance of the coordination of the policies and the policies to be on a long-term approach. So that is why we're working hard between the environmental authorities here in Panama and our energy authorities to close this gap, and also in the process to contribute with our NDCs to the Paris Agreement.
Absolutely. Closing the gap and keeping it to 1.5 degrees warming in alignment with the Paris Agreement, absolutely important. Also in this panel of energy access. Ladies and gentlemen, on my panel, we have just a few minutes left, but before we go, I want to take a minute to get your final statements. I'll ask you to keep your statements, and I'm sorry, to under a minute or so. Thank you so much. You've been such a spectacular panel today. I'd like to start with you, Minister Reynosa. Yes. Oh, please use your mic.
I will forget.
No worries.
No, it's because very short times. I would say that first, it's very important, this kind of dialogue. Like this is a very good scenario. Second, talking about the energy access, usually we see that from the society point of view in one country. But the situation now, for different aspects, is approaching to the access of the some country to the energy. Not the society within the one, not the people within one society, it's countries. Countries, we have problem with the fuels, country with problem to access on some technology that even need, because the production of the technology for generation, for instance, depend on this some small group or company. We are the leader. And they improve the natural innovation, and sometimes this innovation cannot be following with some of the small and poor countries that need to produce electricity in some conditions. I mean, I would like to think about the situation not only of some social group within one society. It's just the situation of the access to the energy source from some small and poor country around the world.
Absolutely. Thank you for those final thoughts. I'd like to turn to you now, Minister Itefa, for your final thoughts.
Thank you. Just to say 2 critical points. The earlier one of our panelists was saying the people who are not getting energy globally is more than 1 billion. It can be 1.2, 1.3, whatever we say. if we see the distribution of this population, it's in developing country, especially where we have high potential of using renewable energy. I think that area needs to get focus, the renewable energy sources that we can use. The second one is investing on the energy supply. I think it's the time for Globe to see alternative energy source. Today, we have been discussing in the BTD that the fossil energy source is under problem in one or the other way. So what will be our next roadmap? How can we get the alternative energy source, either from hydropower, from wind, from hydrogen, from solar, whatever we name? I think partners shall give due consideration on this point. That is general issue I raised. Final point is, from Ethiopia, really, we have good experience that we can share, assessing what do we have, a resource we do have, at country level, at national level, and the sharing among the globe, especially in maintaining the availability of source of energy. Unless we have the water, we cannot take off hydropower. To develop our water, we need to protect our forest. As one of our panelists was saying from Panama, is a wonderful point, that our watersheds, our catchment need to be treated, need to be covered with planted, that we do have good initiative of the green legacy from our Prime Minister, such a way that our resource will be sustainably used. Those are my final points. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Itefa. I'd like to go now to our two digital panelists, starting off with final thoughts from Minister Jorge Rivera staff.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Look, there will be no clean energy transition without universal access to everyone. We expect to have a technology issues, but it's not the main issue as we have said in this panel. We could say about energy resources is not the issue also. We could resume it in three things: capacity building, political willingness, and the resource allocation for the priorities that we have. And we have to bring all this together in a roadmap, a clear roadmap to all the countries to fulfill and to close the gap before the year 2030.
I think you've come up with a great slogan there, a clear roadmap to close the gap. I'd like to turn now to Wanjira Maathai for her final thoughts.
Thank you, and thank you for having the World Resources Institute here. Closing the energy access gap for sub-Saharan African countries and many vulnerable countries like them will definitely require significant financial investment. That's where we have to start, and that's where the proof of the pudding will be. Reliable, abundant, and clean energy is definitely key to creating the sort of prosperous, sustainable, and inclusive economies we need to build the sort of resilience against the greatest challenge of our time. So with a high energy gap and plenty of renewable energy resources, Africa still remains the last frontier for transformation and transformative investments in this area. So I will spend my time working and focusing on the investment, the greening of investments, particularly Chinese investments, in influencing the trajectory of financing towards infrastructure. That's transmission, distribution, and storage. Also access initiatives, especially commercial and SMEs, as we've heard, and not to forget clean cooking.
All wonderful points. Thank you so much for those final thoughts, Wanjira Maathai. Now back to our guests here in the studio. Aneri Pradhan for your final thoughts.
Sure. I just want to echo Wanjira's comment on solidarity. That is truly the way forward. New Energy Nexus is on a mission to support 100,000 clean energy startups globally, and 2 of our accelerators are actually backed by governments. So I would like to invite any of the ministers here today, if you're interested in creating clean energy innovation economies with local entrepreneurs powering and creating jobs, we would love to partner and see how we can use our curriculum to support and finance entrepreneurs in your countries. I'd also like to invite any investors who are watching and any startups especially who are looking for access to funding and support to scale up to visit newenergynexus.com and learn how to tap into these resources out there.
Tapping into the resources that we have available or that we'll be coming up with in the future, all what the BETD is all about. For our final thoughts, I'd like to turn to our last panelist of the day, Ajay Bathur.
We have spent the last hour discussing the various kinds of things that work. Very clearly, reforms work. But if I am a government functionary, I make the reforms and no money flows in. What do I do? Or if I am a trainer, I train people and there are no jobs. Or the other way around, I create jobs and there are no trained people. At the end of the day, each one of us here at the Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue needs to be a jazz musician. Improvise and make music.
I absolutely love those final thoughts. Improvise and make music. I did promise my panelists that we weren't going to do any dancing, but I think we have a little bit of time left. Gentlemen, ladies, if you'd like to, please. No, but seriously, thank you all so much. This is such an incredibly important panel. I'm so happy that you all made the time in your very busy schedules to come and join us, whether here in Berlin or joining us digitally. Once again, I'd like to thank my panelists, Dr. Habtamu Itefa, the Minister of Water and Energy for Ethiopia. Joining us digitally, Dr. Jorge Rivera Staff, the National Secretary of Energy for Panama. Antonio Almonte Reynoso, the Minister of Energy and Mines in the Dominican Republic. Aneri Pradhan, the COO of New Energy Nexus. Dr. Ajay Mathur, Director General for the International Solar Alliance in India. And lastly, but of course not least, Wanjir Mathai, Vice President and Regional Director for Africa, the World Resources Institute. Thank you, panelists. This has been really such a fantastic way to wrap up these sessions on day one of the BETD. I'm going to go ahead and give you a round of applause. Thank you so much for participating.